There is a thief standing in your living room. He has been there for years. He is quiet. He is patient. He does not want your television. He does not want your jewelry. He does not want the cash in your safe. He wants your time. He wants the memory of your daughter's face. He wants the ability to tie your own shoes. He wants your name. And eventually, he wants your life. Alzheimer's disease is the single most terrifying condition in the modern world. We fear cancer, yes. We fear heart attacks. But with those diseases, you die as yourself. You die knowing who you are. With Alzheimer's, you die as a stranger to your own soul. The person you were evaporates layer by layer until only a shell remains. It is a plague. It currently affects 6 million Americans. By the middle of this century, that number will triple. It is a tsunami that is going to crash into our healthcare system and shatter it. We are already spending $321 billion a year treating it. That is more than the GDP of entire nations. By 2050, it could bankrupt Medicare, it could bankrupt the country, so you would assume, you would hope that the smartest people in the world are working on this. You would assume that the pharmaceutical giants with their skyscrapers and their billions in R&D budgets are working night and day to stop this thief. You would think the goal is a cure, but what if I told you that for the last 30 years, the medical establishment hasn't been looking for a cure? What if I told you they have been looking for a product? What if I told you that we effectively found drugs that could stop this disease decades ago? Not new high-tech inventions, but old drugs, cheap drugs, safe drugs, drugs that were already sitting on the pharmacy shelf. But there was a problem, a fatal flaw. They were too cheap. They cost pennies a dose. You couldn't patent them. You couldn't wrap them in a shiny new trademark and sell them for $56,000 a year. You couldn't build a stock portfolio around them, so they buried them. They didn't just ignore them. They actively suppressed them. They defunded the scientists who researched them. They ruined careers to keep the focus on a specific theory, a theory that has failed for 30 years straight, just because that theory was the one that generated the most shareholder value. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a balance sheet. This is the story of how Big Pharma decided that a patient cured is a customer lost. This is the story of the Alzheimer's cabal. To understand the crime, you have to understand the weapon. And in the world of Alzheimer's research, the weapon is a dogma, a religious belief disguised as science. For the last 3 decades, Alzheimer's research has been ruled by a single dictator. It is called the amyloid hypothesis. The idea was born in 1906 when Dr. Alois Alzheimer looked at the brain of a deceased patient and saw these sticky microscopic clumps of protein called beta amyloid plaques. They looked like gunk clogging up the gears of a machine, so the logic followed: the plaques are the killer. If we can scrub the plaques away, like scrubbing rust off a car or cholesterol out of an artery, we cure the disease. It is a seductive idea. It is simple. It is visual. It is easy to explain to a board of directors. It is easy to sell to investors. Look, we have a target. We shoot the target, we win. And because it was so sellable, it became the only game in town. Since the early 1990s, virtually all the funding, billions upon billions of tax dollars from the NIH and billions more from corporate coffers, went into amyloid. If you were a young scientist in 1995 or 2005 and you wanted to study something else, let's say you thought Alzheimer's was caused by inflammation, or a virus like herpes, or a metabolic issue like the brain losing the ability to process sugar, if you applied for a grant to study that you were denied, if you tried to publish a paper on it, you were rejected. There was a group of influential researchers, an amyloid cabal, as some insiders call them, who controlled the review boards and the journals. They decided that amyloid was the truth and anything else was heresy. They built entire careers, entire departments, and entire fortunes on this one hypothesis. There was just one tiny problem. It was wrong. For 20 years, companies like Pfizer, Merck, Roche, and Eli Lilly built drugs to clear these plaques, and mechanically the drugs worked. They cleared the plaques perfectly. They scrubbed the brain clean. But the patients kept dying. Their memory didn't get better. In some cases, it got worse. The cognitive decline accelerated. Think about what that means. They were cleaning the crime scene, but the murder was still happening. The plaques were not the killer. They were the tombstone. They were the result of the disease, not the cause. This should have been the moment science pivoted. This should have been the moment, maybe around 2010, when the industry said, okay, we were wrong, we spent billions, but we learned something, let's look at the other options. But they couldn't pivot. Why? Because of the sunk cost fallacy and because of greed. By 2010, the industry was too deep in the hole. They had promised Wall Street a blockbuster. To admit that the amyloid theory was a dead end would mean admitting that 30 years of research was worthless. It would mean crashing the stock price. So instead of changing course, they doubled down. And when the data didn't fit the theory, they didn't change the theory. They changed the data. This brings us to one of the biggest scientific scandals of the 21st century, a scandal that broke in 2022, but has its roots in 2006. In 2006, a rising star scientist named Sylvain Lesné published a landmark paper in the prestigious journal Nature. The industry was desperate at this point. The plaque-busting drugs were failing. They needed a reason to keep believing, and Lesné gave it to them. He claimed he had found a specific subtype of amyloid, a toxic oligomer called ADAR56 that directly caused memory loss in rats. This was the smoking gun. This was the proof that amyloid was the killer. This paper became one of the most cited papers in the history of Alzheimer's research. It was the bedrock. It was the justification for the next 16 years of drug development. Billions of dollars were poured into targeting this specific mechanism. But there was a ghost in the machine. In 2021, a neuroscientist and physician named Matthew Schrag was investigating a different experimental drug. As part of his due diligence, he started looking closely at the images in Lesné's papers. He looked at the Western blots. These are the images that show protein bands, the visual proof of the experiment. He noticed something odd. The background noise in the images looked repetitive. The bands looked cloned. He zoomed in, he adjusted the contrast, and he realized he was looking at a mirage. It appeared to be Photoshop. The specific bands that proved the existence of this toxic protein appeared to have been pasted. Sections of the image had been digitally altered to make the data look cleaner, to make the result look positive. Schrag blew the whistle. Science magazine conducted a 6-month investigation. They found that not just this paper, but potentially dozens of papers by this author contained manipulated images. The implication is horrifying. The foundational proof that drove 16 years of research might be a fabrication. The specific protein that they have been hunting for the last decade might not even exist in the way they said it did. For 16 years, we chased a ghost, while millions of people forgot their children's names, while families sold their homes to pay for nursing care, while the government poured tax dollars into a black hole. The industry was chasing a mirage based on a lie. And why? Because that lie supported the business model. It supported the monopoly. But here is the twist. While the industry was busy photoshopping results and chasing the expensive patentable amyloid cure, there were other drugs out there, real drugs that actually showed promise in human beings, but nobody wanted to talk about them because they had a fatal flaw. They were virtually free. Let me introduce you to a substance called methylene blue. This isn't a new discovery. It wasn't cooked up in a billion-dollar lab in Cambridge or San Francisco. It was synthesized in 1876. It was the first fully synthetic drug in medicine. It was used as a textile dye for blue jeans. It was used to treat malaria in World War II. But scientists realized early on that it did something else. It supercharged the mitochondria. The mitochondria are the batteries of your cells. They produce the energy that keeps you alive. The brain is the most energy-hungry organ in the body. It consumes 20% of your energy despite being only 2% of your weight. If your mitochondria fail, your brain fails. It's like a brownout in a city. The lights start to dim, the systems shut down. In the mid-2000s, a team at the University of Aberdeen, led by a researcher named Claude Wischik, started testing a derivative of this blue dye on Alzheimer's patients. Wischik wasn't part of the amyloid cult. He was looking at something else. He was looking at tangles. These are twisted proteins called tau that choke the neurons from the inside. If amyloid is the trash outside the house, tau is the fire inside the kitchen. Wischik theorized that methylene blue could dissolve these tangles and reboot the mitochondria. The results from their phase 2 clinical trial in 2008 were stunning. They were unheard of. The patients taking the drug didn't just slow down their decline. In some metrics, they stabilized. The drug appeared to be dissolving the tangles and restoring energy to the brain cells. The reduction in cognitive decline was nearly 90% compared to the placebo over 2 years, 90%. If a cancer drug showed a 90% reduction in tumor growth, it would be the lead story on every news channel in the world. It would be hailed as a miracle. So why didn't you hear about it? Why isn't methylene blue in every memory care unit in America right now? Follow the money. Methylene blue is a chemical you can buy by the bucket. It is an industrial dye. You can buy it for fish tank cleaners. You can't patent the molecule itself. It's too old. It belongs to the public domain. Wishick's company Tarks tried to play the game. They created a proprietary version, a stabilized form called LNTM, so they could get a patent. They had to. You cannot raise money for a clinical trial if you don't have a patent. But when they went to the big pharmaceutical conferences to present their data, they were sidelined. The big funding agencies weren't interested. The major journals were skeptical. Why? Because the business model doesn't work. Pharmaceutical companies are not charities. They are hedge funds that sell pills. To bring a new Alzheimer's drug to market costs roughly $2 to $3 billion in trials. To justify that investment, you need a drug you can sell for a premium price, thousands of dollars a month for 20 years exclusive. You need a monopoly. You cannot build a monopoly on a dye used for denim. Even though Tarks developed a proprietary version, the underlying mechanism was too close to something generic. If they proved it worked, doctors might just prescribe the cheap generic version off label. A pharmacist could compound it for pennies. The risk to profit was too high, so the industry ignored the metabolic approach. They ignored the tau approach. They kept pouring money into the amyloid pit. And when the results for the Tarks phase 3 trials came out later, the media crucified them. They focused on the statistical technicalities. How the trial design was messy because the drug turned people's urine blue, making it hard to create a placebo group. Rather than the signal that the drug was actually helping people, they threw the baby out with the blue bathwater. Meanwhile, the same media and the same regulators were about to roll out the red carpet for one of the most scandalous drug approvals in FDA history, a drug that cost a fortune and didn't work at all. Enter Biogen. In 2021, the pharmaceutical giant Biogen brought a new drug to the FDA. It was called Aduhelm. It was, you guessed it, an amyloid buster. It was the same old theory that had failed 100 times before. Biogen had actually stopped their own clinical trials early because the drug wasn't working. It failed the futility analysis. That is pharma. Speak for it is useless. But then the executives looked at the projected revenue. They looked at the desperation of the market, and they decided to try something bold. They did some data mining. They sliced and diced the numbers, ignoring the failed groups, until they found a tiny subgroup of patients where high doses seemed to have a slight statistical effect. It was shaky science at best. It was manipulation at worst. They took this re-engineered data to the FDA. Now the FDA has an independent advisory committee. These are the smartest neurologists and statisticians in the country. Their job is to look at the data objectively and tell the FDA if a drug is safe and effective. They reviewed the Aduhelm data. They looked at the risks. Brain swelling, brain bleeding, 40% of patients in the high dose group experienced brain swelling or bleeding. They looked at the benefits, essentially zero clinical improvement. And they voted, the vote was 10-0, 10 votes against approval, 0 votes for it, 1 abstention. It was a slam dunk rejection. The experts said, do not unleash this on the American public. It is dangerous and it does not work. But then something unprecedented happened. The FDA bureaucrats, the career officials, some of whom were having off the books meetings with Biogen executives, ignored their own experts. They approved the drug anyway. 3 members of the advisory panel resigned in protest. Dr. Aaron Kesselheim, a Harvard professor, wrote in his resignation letter that this was probably the worst drug approval decision in recent U.S. history. Why did they do it? Look at the price tag. Biogen launched the drug at a price of $56,000 per patient per year for a drug that doesn't improve memory, for a drug that might cause your brain to bleed, The financial implications were staggering. If just 1 million seniors took this drug, it would cost the US healthcare system $56 billion a year. That is more than the budget of NASA and the FBI combined. In fact, Medicare premiums, the money taken out of every senior's Social Security check, went up in 2022 specifically to cover the potential cost of this drug. They reached into your pocket. They reached into your grandmother's fixed income to pay for a poison just to save Biogen's stock price. This is regulatory capture. The agency designed to protect us has been captured by the industry it is supposed to regulate. They prioritize the financial health of Biogen over the physical health of the American people, while the FDA was pushing poison and while the amyloid cabal was protecting their grants. A quiet revolution has been happening in the background. Independent researchers, the ones who aren't on the Big Pharma payroll, have started asking a different question. What if Alzheimer's isn't a brain disease in the way we think? What if it is a metabolic disease? There is a growing body of evidence that Alzheimer's is actually type 3 diabetes. The theory is this: your brain runs on glucose, sugar. It needs a constant supply of fuel. But over a lifetime of high sugar diets, inflammation, and processed food, the brain develops insulin resistance. The insulin receptors stop working. The glucose is there banging on the door, but the neurons can't open it. They can't eat. They starve. And when a neuron starves, it shrivels up and dies. It loses the energy required to form memories, if this is true, and the data is becoming undeniable. Then the amyloid plaques are just the trash that builds up because the janitors, the cells, are too weak to take it out. If this is true, the solution isn't a 506,000 monoclonal antibody. The solution is energy. The solution is ketones. The brain can run on an alternative fuel source called ketones, which you produce when you fast, or when you stop eating sugar, or when you take MCT oil. The solution is generic metabolic drugs like metformin. The solution is lifestyle. But do you see the problem here? You can't patent a ketogenic diet. You can't make billions on MCT oil. You can't sell stop eating sugar for $4,000 a month. If the cure for Alzheimer's is largely nutritional or metabolic, the pharmaceutical industry loses $300 billion a year. They have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders to make sure that doesn't happen. They need the disease to be complex. They need it to be mysterious. They need it to be a molecular lock that only their patented key can open. So they gaslight us. They tell us the science is settled on amyloid. They tell us that anyone talking about diet or metabolic treatments is a quack. They tell us that methylene blue is just fish tank cleaner, ignoring the phase 2 data that showed it worked better than anything they have ever produced. They are protecting the market. They are not protecting the patient. Albert Einstein allegedly said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. By that definition, Alzheimer's research is insane. We have spent 30 years and hundreds of billions of dollars digging in the wrong hole. We have turned a blind eye to fraud. We have accepted failure as the status quo. But maybe it's not insanity. Maybe it's just business. Because as long as they are searching for the cure, the grant money keeps flowing. As long as they approve treatments that don't quite work but reduce plaques, the Medicare payments keep clearing. The system is designed to treat chronic illness, not to cure it. A cured patient is a revenue stream that has dried up. A patient on a monthly maintenance drug is a goldmine. The tragedy of the buried miracle isn't just about one specific drug. It's not just about methylene blue. It's about the fact that our system is incapable of exploring cheap solutions. If the cure for cancer cost 5 cents, do you think you would be able to buy it at CVS tomorrow? Or do you think there would be 10 years of safety studies and regulatory hurdles thrown in its way? We are losing a generation of minds, not to a disease we can't understand, but to a business model we refuse to dismantle. The science exists. The solutions are out there hiding in plain sight, usually in the generic bin or in the grocery aisle. But until we take the profit motive out of the driver's seat of medical innovation, those solutions will stay buried, and we will keep forgetting. We will forget our names. We will forget our families. But we should never, ever forget what they did. This is the rational profit. Thanks for watching. If you want to understand how this same playbook was used to create the opioid crisis, how they turned pain into profit and death into dividends, you need to watch this video here. The story of the Sackler family makes the Alzheimer's fraud look like child's play.